I'd like to believe, like many others, that a world of material and spiritual can exist harmoniously. And although I believe this to be true, actually embodying this on Earth at this time in history is exceptionally difficult. We're a very polarized culture at this moment. And what I've seen happen and what has occurred in my own experiential journey is that if you teeter or you have connections or you're in a bubble on one end of that perspective, whether it be scientific, material model, or a spiritual, religious model, very often what can happen is you stay in your bubble and perceivably for a lifetime, right? Or longer. But what seems to be happening is that all of these bubbles are simultaneously bursting. Interesting, I've been on YouTube and I really like to explore different bubbles of reality that are very outside of my typical realm. And I've been doing this for quite a while. I check multiple opposing news channels online. I go into different bubbles of cultures and communities. And it's so interesting because there's this underlying thread of simultaneously being shook up and starting to either embrace the opposite, either radically, or just you can start to see this uncovering of a process that's going along a spectrum of them being interested and intrigued and curious about opposite elements of what they have been in, systemically, culturally, individually. So science in particular, right? We all know that in America here, we have a very Newtonian-based science model, and which was very difficult for me to navigate in because I very much connect with the spiritual side of myself. These two didn't exist in my healthcare regime in the traditional model. So I was always showing up with 50% of myself, unfortunately. And this is something that I talk about in Awakening Healthcare often, is trying to embrace beyond what we can obviously see as a means to create meaning through illness and as a means to transcend some very deep limiting beliefs and attachments, which is what I see happening so often in terms of the medical community, is that we actually become addicted to identities or illnesses or mental illnesses, and then we glorify them. And sometimes it's even difficult to oppose that because there's so much of a desire for connection and community and a sense to be understood and seen by somebody that we actually can attach and connect with a group or a culture that we feel empowered in, but deep inside us is actually self-limiting. And that's difficult because when you throw all of your eggs into a particular basket, especially externally, right, out in the world, I'm fully showing up as this person with this belief out in the world, and everybody now sees this, you start to develop a sense of, reputation and identity with these individuals. And if you decide you want to change, then everything about your reality within that bubble or culture has to change. And sometimes that's very, very difficult. And we see this play out right now as well. People who are desiring to or becoming aware of the limitations of their particular bubble or belief system, this world and identity we've created around it is hard to navigate away from. We'll have people telling us that we're crazy. We'll have people telling us that, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And you may only have one person as you shift out of a bubble of reality that somehow has your back, some sort of mentor, or friend, or random individual that may be there to help you transcend the limiting beliefs around that particular bubble or way of believing. So my feeling and my theory has been, as I've evolved myself and really broken through many identities and many bubbles, some people call this lifetimes, whatever you believe in, is that it is a process that is not necessarily easy the more you do it. You just become more aware. And that's been a motto that I've had for myself and people I've been in contact with and worked with over a long period of time, is this doesn't get easier. we become more aware to navigate it. And I still hold that belief to be true within me. So the scientific matter-based model we're seeing right now is being dismantled in different ways, and there's still aspects of the bubble that are very intact and very tight and very insulated. And it's so interesting because there's a blindness that happens when your bubble becomes very tight. Sometimes it feels like it becomes smaller and you start doing things with only this bubble of people, and it really is like there's a steel wall between reality, what's really happening outside of your bubble, and what you believe to be true within your bubble. Because you boost each other up in that bubble. Feels good. It strokes the ego when you have all of these people that are believing and hyping each other up in this small little container. But there is a true blindness as to what's going on out in the rest of the world when we become so insulated and limited with our vision. And it's quite shocking if somebody rips you out of the bubble, pulls you out of the bubble, if somebody pops your bubble, if your bubble gets popped. And that's often what happens, I've discovered, is that if you are someplace and it's time for you to shift or evolve, if you're not picking up on the synchronicities or signs in your reality to start to look at your life more introspectively and start to release some things that don't feel aligned anymore, and take that difficult journey externally and internally to realign your life. If you're not listening to those synchronicities and signs, they're going to get louder, more difficult, and very often there has to be this divine divine interaction between an experience that we could only claim as a God experience to really help shake us, to awake us, so to speak. And then it's difficult because then so much is accumulated. You kind of know it to be true within your heart already. And now it's just shoved right in your face. And it's more shocking, not only for yourself, but then transitioning in the external of the environment around you, it becomes more shocking to everybody. One thing that I'm really invested in, and something that has helped me a lot, is as I've learned these little identities and processes I've been on and things I've believed in and then kind of gone through along my development process, is that I learned to not be as attached. I learned now that I am en route here on earth in my journey with God. I'm in a process and I'm evolving and I'm developing. When we resist that, it becomes suffering and it becomes painful. And we start to experience mental illness when we don't feel aligned, or when what we believe in our heart and what we believe in our mind is in conflict, or what we believe internally and what we're demonstrating externally is in conflict, right? And then very often, if we're deeply afraid to look deeply and introspectively at ourselves comprehensively, we blame the external for what we really need to mitigate and work through internally. And again, it's easier to blame a culture, a belief system, or somebody else as to where they're going wrong than to really understand that that same thing somehow lies within us. So I just wanted to share with you today this process and this relationship between spirit and matter. I see, a lot of the academics and scientific realm starting to deconstruct, and, all of a sudden you hear, a physician or a traditional scientist, all of a sudden talking about like, hey, I'm really into astrology now. Or I'm really into, energy work. And you can see that, okay, now they're going to go on this process of starting to move out of their bubble of the strict material realm. There's some sort of desire to seek towards a transcendent. And it's difficult and sometimes dangerous to just snap yourself awake and be fully present in a spiritual experience. And this is what happened to me, actually. And it's a gift now, and it's lucky that I was able to navigate it. But I had a really ambush spiritual awakening. Now, I already was fairly connected to my spiritual side, I would say, prior to that. So it wasn't so shocking, because I do believe people go through this and they either don't make it or they completely lose their mind because it's just too overwhelming. But I was on a spiritual path, and I probably needed some more groundwork, actually. But then when I had this ambush awakening, I just flew disassociated to different dimensions and really had a mystical, powerful experience that took me really close to a year to fully start to come down from and to organize it and integrate what had happened to me in a way that was clear and in a way that I felt as though I could, come back into the world without necessarily losing some of the beauty and wisdom that I received in that experience. And this is a danger that I see on the opposite spectrum with the excessive right brain or new age community or spiritual community, and especially people now who are, there's a lot of energy going into psychedelics as a means to treat mental health. And in fact, this needs to be talked about, because although that seems like a good option, right? We all want to be more aware, to be more compassionate and loving, and have a broader lens and perception of humanity in the world. But what I have worked with myself, and I actually am working with other people, is when they're not ready, or it's not at their particular time to go into this very mystical state through psychedelics or what have you, and they have a very difficult time, and they actually get stuck coming down. And this is a danger, I feel, and also a blessing, I believe, is to kind of how I had my experience, which was more of a natural progression of me just willing to be a full participant within my life story and not shying away or being afraid when I was presented with a challenge to change, right? So waking up for me more fully with awareness was a natural progression that was very difficult, but I always leaned into the challenges and opportunities. I always leaned into my suffering, and I went in to really observe it and look at this. So this is one of the reasons why I don't really have a fully positive opinion about even using psychedelics as a means to get away from some of the other methods and pharmaceuticals that we're using now for people with anxiety and depression. I mean, I would love to see, and this is something that I'm working on with myself and some other individuals, of some sort of mapping of awareness to work through trauma, to see, let's see if this works first naturally. Let's really see if people who've manage to uncover their PTSD and their CPTSD and some of the deepest traumatic experiences, not only psychologically through the mind, through a psychotherapist or psychiatrist, but really truly somebody who gets that inner right brain hemisphere aspect of the work as well. It's a reformation that we really haven't seen in terms of therapeutics, especially here in the West. So I would love to see that. Let's really fully have an appropriate method of guidance through uncovering trauma, to see what that does before we shoot somebody into outer space with an ayahuasca or psilocybin experience. And yes, maybe that works, but don't you see often how those experiences we can become, we somehow start to externalize the importance through the externalized means. So the plant, or then we worship, I hear people talk about ayahuasca saying, mother, the mother, whatever. There's this kind of nebulous understanding that this is something powerful outside of them that's helping them. But really it's a call to more of an inner alignment and understanding with all that is in the universe under God, not just the plant. So, that's really what I wanted to share today, is, kind of observing what bubble you've lived in. And there are a lot of people who are popping bubbles, who've already been in one bubble, who've polarized into the other spiritual, or even the spiritual to the scientific. And there are these people who exist who are really beautifully traversing more of a harmonious center point, 0 point, neutral point, where they've had the experience of one, they've had the experience of the other, they've been able to distill throughout themselves what they needed to learn within those experiences, and found a way to alchemize this kind of center harmonious point, which for me has been exceptionally helpful navigating my chronic illness and navigating in this world where everything is so uncertain and we're externalizing, glorifying, identifying with what I believe a lot of the things that need to be integrated within, and we're externalizing it, and it's starting to look a little peculiar, right? It's idiosyncratic, it's just weird at times, and we're normalizing this, and maybe this is part of the process, but I would love to see more people understand that what is within is without, and it's a reflection. And if we could kind of do it the opposite way, instead of externalizing first and then kind of integrating, is start to feel and really notice what's arising within you and really take the time to work through that and find the right help that we need before we just claim it as an identity outside of us and glorify that. Because I do believe at some point this will just lead to yet another bubble that needs to be popped.